Hey Ottawa, this is your Monday market snapshot for the Ottawa real estate market for Monday, May 6th, 2024. I typically release these in the morning, but today I wanted to wait because I figured that the Ottawa Real Estate Board stats were going to come out, and I was lucky they did come out this afternoon. So this is an afternoon update. The stats for my stuff were taken yesterday, and they cover the week, but I've also got the month end stats updated from my stats, and then I've also got the Ottawa Real Estate Board stats. So let's go. Okay, so first off, citywide, you see that the overall inventory climbed by over 100 this last week. Most notably, condos up by 50, and then detached and towns were a little bit less. The sales were up slightly from what we had last week, but not up to the levels that we had even just last year. Okay, so this is the visual of the inventory breakdown. You can see the overall inventory is actually at the same peak or slightly above what our peak was last year. The active inventory still is a little bit lower because our peak last year was in the fall. It was late October when there weren't very many sales happening. So our sales are, fairly strong, pretty steady for like a slower spring market, but our inventory obviously is very high. So you can see last year our inventory was just at about just shy of 1,500, and this year we're up at 2,300 or so. So it's a huge gap in the amount of inventory that we have, and the sales are pretty comparable, but not the same percentage up, obviously. Okay, so when we look at the new listings, there were 545 properties listed this week. 108 of those, or 20%, were relisted properties. That's the gray line at the bottom. And 437 of those, or 80%, were new to the market this week. So those percentages of like relisted versus new properties is kind of remaining the same, but as the number grows, the percentage is staying the same, but the number of new listings has been quite high for the last month. You can see that. That's the blue line. So let's look at the sales and break those down into different sort of important factors. We had 287 sales this past week. 18% of those sales had no conditions, and 33% of the properties that sold this week sold at or above the asking price. Those percentages have stayed pretty steady for the last little while. When we look at just the sales that happened for properties that's selling within the first 7 days, it was 48 properties, which represented 17% of the sales this past week. 40% of those properties sold with no condition, so obviously a lot higher percentage, and 71% of those properties sold at or above the asking price. When we look at the properties that sold within 30 days of going on the market, it was 66% of the sales this week were homes or properties that had been on the market for 30 or fewer days, represented 188 properties. 16% of those had no conditions, which it's kind of funny because that percentage is actually lower than the overall no conditions. I had to double check that because that is not normal. But in fact, there were a number of properties that had been on for a long period of time that when they did sell, they sold with no conditions. Bit of a surprise, but it was the case this week. And 44% of the properties sold at or above asking price. Okay, so breaking down the at or above asking price, I'm happy to say that I did find an easier way to be able to capture this info without having to go through every single one in detail. So I will be able to continue sharing this info if people feel it is of use and that it's being presented in an okay manner. So when I'm saying that 40% or whatever of the properties are selling at or above asking price, in this case it was just shy of 33% this week. We had 94 homes that was the case of. Of those 94, 50 of them, which was 53%, sold at asking or up to 1% over asking price. And so that generally is somewhere around like $1,000 or a little bit over $1,000 over asking. So very close to asking price. 34 of those homes, which was 36% of them, sold between 1% and 5% asking price. That generally is like, kind of up to $10,000 or so, maybe a little higher. It really depends on the price of the property. And 10 homes this week sold for more than 5% of the asking price. So although that number is higher, there's 5 last week that sold over 5% above the asking price. The percentage over was less. So the highest this past week was 13.8% over asking, which is a lot, but it was only, that house specifically was only less than 70,000 over asking price. The highest dollar value over was 75,500 over asking, and it was on a $600,000 property. Okay, next up, we're going to zoom in and see what happened in the different areas of the city. And don't go away yet, because I will have the month end stuff for April after this. Okay, so central urban region, we can see that the active listings, it was most jump in the condo market, not much change for detached in towns. And the sales were up for detached quite significantly and down quite a bit for condos, and it was steady for the townhomes this past week. In Canada and Stittsville, with slight increases in the number of active listings, mostly in condos, surprisingly. And the sales were up for towns and condos, but actually down for detached. In Barrhaven and Riverside South, we have an increase in the number of detached and towns on the market and a slight decrease in condos, although there's a lot listed there right now. And the sales in Barrhaven and Riverside South were down across property types this past week. And finally, in Orleans, we had just a slight decrease for detached in towns for active inventory, a jump for the condos, and and sales were up across property type, especially the condos in Orleans this past week. As always, I've got the full details in the chart format. I did notice this week that for the most part, our conditional sales are below the solid sales, the firm sales. So I do expect our sales numbers to actually be a little bit lower next week. And then I would say the week after that will probably also be lower because there's a long weekend in there. Here's the townhomes, and you can see the townhomes still have a bit of a tighter market. They're quicker to sell, and there tend to always be more firm sales than conditional sales, and that's not always because there's going to be fewer the next week. It's just that more townhomes, I think, are selling without conditions. And finally, the condos. This is probably the one where there are more conditional properties sold than sales, but that's normal because conditional periods are longer for condos, typically. Okay, next up is the monthly snapshot. I'm not going to be including my brokerage ones. I'm just going to skip over to the Ottawa Real Estate Board stats for the month of April. Okay, so this is the Ottawa Real Estate Board stats, and they pull those from the Canadian Real Estate Association, who does stats nationwide. For their boundaries of what they're looking at, again, this is mostly the city of Ottawa boundaries, but then they've also included a lot of the smaller towns that are exterior to the city, so such as Carleton Place and Russell, Embrun, Rockland, things like that. They're outside the boundaries, but sort of integral to the larger area of Ottawa. So that's why their numbers are higher than what you get when you look at my numbers. So 1,456 properties sold in April of 2024, and that was an 8.9 increase from April of 2023. It was 2% below the 5-year average, which you've got some wonky years in there, 2020 being one year where there was hardly any sales in April, and 2023 was below this year, and then you've got a couple really high years, and then 6.9% below the 10-year average. For the benchmark prices, which if you aren't aware of what those are, please go back and look at my stats video that I released probably about almost 2 months ago that explains a little bit on what a benchmark price is and how these stats are different than what I typically share. But the MLS HPI benchmark prices for composite all homes were $643,700, which is up just slightly from year on year. Single family homes was $727 and change, up 1.6 year on year. Townhouse row were $500,000, and apartment. And again, those definitions are not the same as my definitions. You need to know what they're representing. The apartments are definitely condo apartments. The townhomes are any row townhome. That could be a stacked condo, a row condo, or a townhouse freehold. And then the single family homes is detached and semi-detached. Okay, so this is their graphic of that. So they've got the new listings of just shy of 2,600, active listings just shy of 3,000. Again, that area is a wider catchment area than what I share, because we're at 23-ish hundred when you look at my numbers, and days on market, and then the benchmark prices are there. Okay, so these are my monthly average sale prices. So this is, I updated from what I had shared last week, which was a couple days short of the year, so it didn't capture all the sales. Interestingly, almost all of the average sale prices for April actually dropped a little bit when I had the final few days of stats in there. It's just random which ones happen to be there, but the condo apartment actually ended up shifting slightly into the negative there, 0.9% below the March to April, and otherwise it was just moderate gains across different property types. This is the average sale price detached year by year. You can see it's just slightly up from last year and just slightly higher than it was last month. And semi-detached, I mention it every time that semi-detached is much more volatile based on which semi-detached properties are selling, but just slightly lower than 2022 and 2023, but up month over month for the last 4 months. And townhomes, we can see it's been quite steady, slightly up from last month and just slightly up from last year as well. And condos, this is all condos, both apartments and condo row homes and stacked homes. And again, slightly up from last year and slightly up from last month. Okay, so these are all updated. This is the close price to the original list price ratio. So you can see that all of the property types are selling for a little bit less than 99% of the ask price. And you can see that in all 3 cases, actually that dropped over the last month. So typically, if you look back at last year, they kind of all peaked in the May or June. Actually, condos were kind of like June, July, but usually the spring market peaks kind of in May is when the quickest market is, the most sales, the most demand for properties. But we've had a quick start. So our February and March was quite quick, and our April seemed to be a little bit more tempered this month. And with the number of new listings that came on, it just meant that there was more properties to choose from. And then buyers had a little bit more choice. Therefore, they were able to offer a little bit less than maybe what they even were last month. So you can see that they slightly are decreased from what we had in March. The average days to sell, you can see that for detached and condos, it actually rose from last month. So that sort of ties in with what I had just said about more choice, more inventory on the market. So, that didn't drop. It's not peaked in this way. It's the lowest would have been in April, May. But this year it bottomed out a little bit earlier. So it's taking slightly longer, 24 days for average detached home, 21 for towns, 32 for condos. Okay, so this is also updated. We've got the monthly sales for the last 10 years. So you can see the black line is for 2024. And indeed, we do have slightly higher sales than the 2023, which was the dark blue. And so if you take the average of the last 5 years there, you've got, 2020 was obviously way below. So that's pulling down the average. 2023 was below us, but you can see the other 2 purple ones are 2021 and 2022. And those are the other 2 that are in the average of the last 5 years. So we're right in the middle of those 5 years. Next up is the months of inventory. And so the months of inventory is how long it would take to sell all of the current inventory at the same rate of sales that we had. So all the currently actively listed inventory, if no more properties came to the market, if they continued selling at the same rate that we were at. So right now we're sitting at 2.3 for detached, 1.5 for townhomes, and 2.2 for condos. And I was actually a little bit surprised with the detached having actually dropped from last month. I thought that it would have climbed just like the other two, climbed slightly. But I guess the sales picked up a bunch for the detached homes this last month. And this is the overall for months of inventory across the city, across property types. This is a city of Ottawa boundaries. And you can see that the curve kind of looks like it's kind of bottoming out. Looks like we've reached the lowest point for this year. It's possible it can change. Things can always change in the market. But right now we're sitting just above 2 months of inventory across property types across the whole city. And that is still by definition in a seller's market, although I think that given how far below that red line of the sellers to balance market it's been for so long, it does really feel like a balanced market for a lot of people. I say it every month, but there are certain pockets that are selling very quick, fast, over lots of competition. But for the most part, a lot of the city, there's a lot of inventory on. People have a little bit of time to decide what they want to buy and take their time. So it's a little bit more balanced than maybe the definition allows. Okay, so that was my update for April and for the first week of May of 2024. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out or leave a comment. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up so other people can find the video as well.
Not so much
Hope you have a fantastic
climbing. The inventory is keeping
okay, so that was my update for April and for the first week of May of 2024. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out or leave a comment. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up so other people can find the video as well.
In June,
hope you have a fantastic week.
Rate announcement. And what
okay, so that was my update for April and for the first week of May of 2024. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out or leave a comment.
The overnight
if you like
lending
this
rate
video,
doesn't
please
directly
give it a thumbs up
affect
so other people can find the video
most
as
people
well.
are taking
Hope you have a
fixed
fantastic
mortgages
week.
these days, and they're not affected by the
okay, so that was my update
rate,
for April and for the first week
articles
of
that come out
May
and
of
say
2024.
That,
if you have any
the
questions,
dropping,
please don't hesitate to reach
the
out or leave a comment. If you like this video,
and
please give it a thumbs up so other people can find the video as well.
People
hope you have a fantastic
believe
week.
that it's a better time, so they start buying.
Okay, so that was my update for April and for the first week
of
May of 2024. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out or leave a comment. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up so other people can find the video as well.
Above what we saw last year in the fall. So
okay, so that was my update for April and for the first week of May of 2024. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out or leave a comment. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up so other people can find the video as well. Hope you have a fantastic week.
Play into the
okay, so that was my update for April and for the first week of May of 2024. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out or leave a comment. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up so other people can find the video as well.
Have a great week.
Hope you have a fantastic week.